Chapter 86, The Game of Queens. Hovering above Storm's End, a massive new airship had just arrived. This airship was made specifically for Maximus and could be used as a mobile fortress that had everything the palace would have and then some. Maximus put this request in whenever the first airships were created. The dwarves had to customize the airship and redesign it multiple times before they came to an agreement on which design to use. Once that was done, the construction started a few years ago and didn't get completed until a few weeks ago. On the ground, Marjorie was being escorted by a few Imperial guards as she had been freed from her captivity. She was being taken to airship where Maximus resided. Though, she didn't even know that she was no longer married, so everything she was going to hear from Maximus would come as a surprise. Ascending on one of the mini-transport airships, Marjorie's expression shifted from anxious to awestruck. The vessel was like nothing she'd ever imagined. Intricate halls with gold and silver inlays, tapestries depicting mythical creatures draping the walls. A massive door opened to reveal Maximus himself standing in a luxurious room. Beside him, Hela leaned against a pillar, arms crossed with a grin on her face. "Marjorie Tyrell," Maximus said, his voice smooth and controlled. "Welcome." She hesitated just a moment before speaking. "Your Excellency," she replied, bowing her head. Maximus gestured toward a seat across from him. "Sit," he offered. "We have much to discuss." She took her place gracefully, gazing around at the lavish surroundings. "I owe you thanks for my rescue," she began. "Your gratitude is not necessary," Maximus replied coolly. "Stannis' arrogance sealed his fate long before we arrived." Marjorie smiled, intrigued by his confidence but cautious of his power. "My grandmother," she ventured, "spoke highly of your diligence." Maximus leaned forward slightly. "Lady Olenna knows how to play the game better than most." His tone softened. "And so do you." Marjorie paused, choosing her words carefully. "I know that I was a pawn in this war of kings." Hela chuckled from the corner. "You were a queen to another man just days ago," she said, teasing the young Tyrell. "It's amazing how quickly crowns change hands." Maximus continued. "Your marriage to Renly has been ended by your father as he is no longer a king. In exchange for this, you're now betrothed to me and will become part of the imperial harem as one of my queens." The news was a surprise to Marjorie, who never expected such a thing. Her eyes widened, but she quickly masked her surprise with a smile. "I see," she responded. Hela walked closer, examining Marjorie. "You seem pleased," she said. "Should I not be?" Marjorie replied, not hiding the excitement she had. While it wasn't widely known, Renly had a lover who was Loras Tyrell, the Lord Commander of the Rainbow Guard. Renly wasn't interested in a relationship with Marjorie and only married her to gain the support of House Tyrell. On their wedding night, when they were supposed to consummate their marriage, Renly refused to lay with Marjorie. Marjorie wasn't blind and knew about his lover, so she tried to work with him, but Renly refused to lay with her. So, now that she was no longer married to him and was now betrothed to Maximus, who in her opinion was a much better husband to have than Renly. "Do you know how suspicious it makes me? First Renly, now you." Maximus smiled. "And yet you don't seem worried." "I'm glad to have a husband who looks at me like a woman," Marjorie said boldly, as she saw Maximus's eyes linger on her. Her beauty was not overstated. She carried herself with confidence and grace that would rival any queen. "I'm going to enjoy having you around," Hela said with a grin. "She is," Maximus replied. "Arianne will as well. Welcome to your new life." Marjorie watched him steadily, recognizing sincerity when she saw it. The Tyrells were masters at playing the game, but she could see that Maximus did not play games with the empire he built. He didn't need to. "Then I'll pledge myself to you with more than just words, my emperor," she confessed. "One marriage never mattered much to me before now." It was then that Maximus truly knew he had made the right decision to break her from Renly. He rose from his chair and held out a hand as Hela opened the door to leave them alone. Catelyn Stark rode through the camps along the riverlands where the northern host had gathered. Hundreds of tents dotted her path, with cooking fires and horses tied up to horse posts. She pressed forward, eyes scanning the swarm of men. "Lady Stark," called a young bannerman. "You're looking for the king?" "Yes," Catelyn said. "Where is my son?" "At the front lines," he replied. "They're awaiting Lord Bolton's forces to join before their assault on Lannisport." "Thank you," she nodded. "Inform my husband that we need to speak when he gets a chance." The The soldier nodded and ran towards the tents. Catelyn moved her horse through the camp until she reached Robb's command tent. His wolf was outside, watching all who came and went with sharp eyes. At her approach, Grey Wind sat up and growled low before recognizing her. "Good boy," she smiled, throwing him a scrap of dried meat before entering the tent. Inside, a map of the Riverlands was set out on canvas across a table. Robb stood over it with several commanders and high lords crowded around him. Among them was Hoster Tully, who had recovered well after being left at Riverrun. He looked up sharply at Catelyn's entrance. "Daughter," he said, opening his arms in greeting. "Look at you, a woman among wolves." Catelyn embraced him tightly before stepping back. "And you're here, strong as ever," she said with relief in her voice. "I can't believe Edmure let you ride." "He did not," Hoster chuckled. "Your boy Robb sent for me, knowing Edmure would never break a king's command." Robb looked up from the table and turned to his mother. "We weren't expecting you so soon." Catelyn looked at him with fierce pride. Her son had grown into a man throughout this war, a leader commanding an army beyond what she thought possible when they set out. "Mother," he said affectionately, motioning for her to come closer. "We were just discussing our plans." Catelyn moved to join them, quiet but observant. The lords respected her presence and gave way as she examined the map. "Well?" she asked after a moment, scanning their faces. One of Lord Karstark's sons spoke up first. "Once Roose Bolton arrives, my lady, we'll strike Lannisport." "And take it," added one of the Umbers. Catelyn shook her head in disbelief at how confident they all seemed. "Then you've driven the Lannisters halfway across the continent." "More than halfway," Robb replied with a grin. "If Tywin takes his forces west of Lannisport and leaves King's Landing poorly defended, then Uncle Renly." "Renly is no longer king," Catelyn interrupted with an intense look. The men went silent at this statement. "What do you mean?" Robb asked. "The Tyrells have abandoned him," Catelyn explained. "They sent a raven. Renly's imprisoned, and the Tyrells have thrown their banners behind the Empire." The gathered lords murmured. Most of them feared that the Empire would come north next after dealing with Stannis. "God save us," whispered Lord Karstark. "Are we to be next?" "Maximus has not betrayed us," Robb replied, his jaw clenching in frustration. They thought if they kept saying this it would be false. "We need Lannisport now. Once we take it, the Crag, Casterly Rock, then it will be all over for the Lannisters." He turned back to his commanders and father. "We will not shy away from this now." Eddard, who had been quiet till now, decided to speak up on the matter. "The Emperor will probably not make a move on King's Landing yet. He will probably seek justification as he has with his taking of the Stormlands. For now, he has no justification, but even then, if he wanted to, he could just invade King's Landing and then start heading north." His words were strong, but all the lords knew how powerful the Imperials were. "It is only a matter of time before the whole continent is under his thumb," said Lord Karstark. "Can anyone stand against him?" Robb slammed his fist onto the table. "I will not abandon the North or our cause." Catelyn watched him carefully. He had always been spirited and rebellious, but now there was hardness in him. "Then we press forward," Robb continued, "to Lannisport." The men took up the call and began ordering their soldiers into march formation. In King's Landing, Tyrion received word that Stannis had been captured by the Emperor. The news of Renly's imprisonment alongside Stannis created a shift in his thinking on what the next move should be. At first, he thought that Stannis would be able to fight off some of Imperial forces since they didn't know much about them besides being good at trade and expanding like wildfire into other territories. Now it appeared that Stannis's was wiped out as quickly as the Vale agreed to join the Empire. With both Stannis and Renly no longer a threat, he knew what was coming next. King's Landing was only a matter of time, and it was just a question of when, not if. "We need to send word to my father," Tyrion said to Varys, who stood at his side in the council chamber. "Tell him that the storm is over for now, but a dragon's wrath will soon be coming." Varys nodded and passed the message onto a scribe. He gave Tyrion a look, then asked in his subtle way, "And do we have any plans ourselves?" Tyrion considered for a moment before answering. "We have two enemies left," he said quietly. "Robb Stark and Maximus." Varys leaned in closer. "And which is the greater threat?" Tyrion tilted his head slowly. "Robb comes first and more dangerously every day. But Maximus, well, even the greatest wall must crumble when enough hammers fall on it." He paused, then whispered to himself, "I wonder how long that will take." Varys shifted slightly. "I suppose we shall see," he mused, though he had his own plans, and he didn't plan to go down with Lannisters. Chapter 87: Reorganization of the Stormlands. At Dragonstone, the Vermilion Guard Legion had secured the island and placed the Imperial banner on top of the castle. Stannis had left a few people to tend to the castle while he was away, but it was not enough to stop the Vermilion Guard from taking the island. Although Dragonstone itself fell in less than an hour, the true surprise came when the surrounding islands capitulated without resistance. Claw Isle, Driftmark, and Sweetport Sound all surrendered, fearing retribution from the Imperials. Maximus had called for all lords of the Stormlands to come to Storm's End in a month and swear fealty, or their castles would be reduced to ashes. Many of the lords were already on the way, as they had switched sides the moment his soldiers' boots landed on the continent. They heard about the fall of Storm's End and knew what it took to survive. The Vermilion Guard did not pillage, nor did they take hostages. What they did was reinforce the islands in preparation for whatever came next. They collected all weapons and had anybody who had connections to Stannis gathered. There were soldiers who wanted to be part of the battle at Storm's End, but they were not allowed to join despite how much they requested. 5 massive airships flew above Dragonstone, with their supply crates being lowered onto the ground. They were filled with weapons, food, and building materials to reinforce the islands and prepare troops stationed on the islands. In Storm's End, the Imperial harem had gathered as the first children were going to be born. Sitting within the delivery, several nurses and attendants ran around the room checking over Hela, Arianne, and Lilith. It was only a few hours later when Hela was the first to give birth to a boy. The boy's first cry filled the stone halls of Storm's End. Hela cradled the newborn in her arms as the nurses quickly wrapped him in a cloth bearing the Imperial dragon sigil. Maximus entered moments later, flanked by 2 guards who stopped at the door. He crossed the room without a word, dropping to one knee beside Hela's bedside. She lifted the boy toward him. "A strong one," she said, voice filled with exhaustion. Maximus gently took the infant, looking at his son's face, broad forehead and clenched fists. Blood of 2 great lines flowed through this child, the Asgardian bloodline and his own. "We'll name him Lucan," Maximus said. "Lucan Invictus." One of the nurses jotted down the name on a document. A week later, Arianne began to scream as Maximus's second child was about to be born. She was surrounded by her attendants, hands gripping the sheets as another life fought its way into the world. Her labor was harder, longer. The doctor was called twice, and twice he shook his head. Yet Arianne refused to break. When at last the second child was born, a girl, there was a moment of silence, as she coughed once, then screamed, as fierce as her brother. Arianne collapsed back against the bed, a satisfied smile appearing on her lips. Maximus took the girl in his arms. She stared up at him as she began to calm down. "We'll call her Seraphina," he said. "Seraphina Invictus." The midwives barely had time to clean the bloodied linens before Lilith's cries signaled the third birth was beginning. Lilith, the quietest of the 3, endured her labor without complaint, teeth clenched, eyes wide. Hours dragged by before at last, Lilith gave birth to another boy, smaller than Lucan. Maximus lifted him up into the light, the boy's hair black as night. "Orion," he said simply. "Orion Invictus." By morning, 3 heirs were born. Messages were sent across both continents announcing the birth of 3 imperial heirs. Out of the great houses, the ones who already had faith in the Imperial Union were House Martell, House Tyrell, and House Arryn. Messages were sent to the rest of the continent by Tywin, letting them know that House Martell and House Tyrell alongside House Arryn were traitors to the continent and needed to be squashed like bugs. House Greyjoy also received a message from Tywin Lannister. He had grown to respect them as they were some of the only houses who didn't join the Stark cause. They had continued their tradition of raiding and pillaging, almost uninhibited by anything else. Robb thought he had the north secured by marrying a Frey. Edmure thought he had Riverrun secure by being the garrison, but both were wrong. The Ironborn raiders had taken Deepwood Motte, Torrhen Square, and now had their sight on Riverrun and Moat Cailin. There were ships raiding Seaguard, Saltpans, Fairmarket, and even a rumored raid on the Twins. The rest of this part of the continent was open for the taking, as they thought the Ironborn wouldn't dare attack while the northern banners were gathered to fight the Lannisters. Tywin proposed an alliance with the Greyjoys, promising them the Stark's heads if they were to assist the Lannisters in ending the rebellion with the condition of kneeling to Joffrey. In his eyes, Moat Cailin was Stark land, and if the Greyjoys took it and raided the north from the sea, then Robb Stark would have nowhere to run when he finally turned his army around and headed home. Tywin's plans to fight the Starks and Imperials had changed once more, especially with Edmure Tully and other lords of the Riverlands becoming more cautious and gathering within Riverrun as the Ironborn started to raid their lands. With no immediate threat from the south, Tywin would let the Ironborn raid and take control of the north before he made his move. Then he would take what was left of the northern host after they were weakened from fighting the Greyjoys. In Winterfell, there was a raid on the castle by the Ironborn since most of the guards were fighting in Robb's army. But the raid had failed, and all the attackers were captured alive by agents of the Shadowhand who were ordered to protect the members of the Stark family. Theon Greyjoy, who betrayed Robb and rejoined the Ironborn, was in the dungeons alongside his sister, who was captured alongside him. They had tried to raid and take Winterfell but ultimately failed when they met the agents of the Shadowhand. Thanks to this, Robb could focus on the war in the south. But the Shadowhand were only protecting the Stark family, so places like Deepwood Motte and Torrhen's Square had fallen quite easily to the Ironborn's raids. It had been brought up many times by other lords that a small portion of the army should split off and deal with the Ironborn. But since they were so close to Lannisport, Robb wanted to continue. He believed that they could take Lannisport and force the Lannisters in time for them to deal with the Ironborn. A few weeks later in Storm's End, the lords of the Stormlands had gathered within the Hall of Storm's End, awaiting the Emperor to walk in. They came from every corner. Tarth, Cunnington Lands, Penrose, Estermont, and even stragglers from Massey's Hook. A few moments later the doors to the hall opened, causing the lords to become quiet. The first to enter was Maximus, who quickly walked to the throne at the other end of the room, followed by the Imperial guards. "My lords," Maximus began, "I am pleased your journey was so quick. Let's see if your loyalty moves with the same speed." His eyes examined each of them. "You know why you're here. You've seen what becomes of those who defy me." The room was silent. One of the first to kneel was Lord Cunnington, known for his opportunistic alliances. "The Stormlands are yours," Cunnington said as he rose. "I served Robert and Stannis. But you, Emperor, are no false king." Maximus gave him a nod, content that the first declaration had been made. The other lords, with less hesitation than he anticipated, followed suit. Some were eager to pledge new loyalty, others resigned to it. Each knew there was no other choice. Just as the last of the noble houses completed their oaths, the doors swung open again. 3 members of the Shadowhand walked in with Commander Edric of the Grey Legion. Behind them, stumbling and bound, were Stannis Baratheon and Renly Baratheon. The former kings looked at the gathered men, bitterness and anger in their eyes. The lords of the Stormlands shifted uncomfortably, watching their once lieges be brought to their knees in chains. Maximus stood up from the throne and looked at them. "Stannis," he said flatly. "Renly." The lords of the Stormlands stood on either side as the former kings were shamed. "These 2 men," he continued, "took the names of king and left the realm to burn. Their crowns were built on arrogance. Now that arrogance is now ash that will never have a chance to burn again." Maximus wasn't going to kill them despite how much they deserved it. He had them moved to the side still in their chains as he continued on with the gathering. "The Stormlands will undergo a massive change in order to match imperial standards. All noble families present today will retain the current lands they own and will be granted more depending on their status and such." The gathered lords' eyes widened in surprise. Many thought they would lose land because of this war and be replaced by foreign nobles. But hearing that not only would they keep their lands but would also get more land caused them to look forward to the future with much enthusiasm. The following hours consisted of laying out the new structure of the Stormlands and how it would all be transitioned. The lords themselves would govern under new titles. This was just a draft to see how things would function before making an official decision. With the lords and ladies of the Stormlands submitting to Maximus, the Lannisters had only Robb Stark and the North to contend with before it was too late. Tywin Lannister understood that if they could make the North bleed, the Imperials would be forced to shift massive amounts of help to the North. He did not count the Lannisters out of this war yet, not by a long shot. Stannis' wife, Celis Florent, and daughter, Shireen Baratheon, were placed under house arrest rather than thrown into the dungeons like Stannis had been. They had nothing to do with this war besides being part of the Baratheon household through either marriage or birth. As such, they were not punished or treated harshly. In King's Landing, Joffrey had just ordered the army under his command to set up a massive fortification leading into the Stormlands to prepare for an incursion from the Imperials. The small council had to move quickly to secure things before the eyes of the Emperor turned in their direction. They had already raised an army of 40,000 men from the surrounding Crownland lords and were looking to reach 60,000 by the end of the year. At the port of King's Landing, the construction of the royal fleet was going well and would soon reach 500 ships by the end of the year. This number was nowhere near the number of ships that the Ironborn were building, nor were they built as fast. But they hoped it would be enough to fend off against Imperial ships. Thanks to studying Imperial ships, the royal fleet had cannons on the decks of their ships. They had managed to get a schematic of how Imperial cannons were built and used that to start building their own. Now they had cannons for both their royal fleet and royal army. But even with these cannons, they didn't have the dragons and other aerial creatures that the Imperial Union had. Chapter 88 Trip Beyond the Wall. At the Fist of the First Men Beyond the Wall, Lord Commander Jeor Mormont and a little more than 300 men was camped out on the hill. They had left Castle Black in response to unusual activity from the wildlings and the disappearance of several seasoned rangers, including Benjen Stark, the first ranger. Sitting in his own tent, Lord Commander Mormont sat with his commanders as a messenger brought some news. "Commander, we just returned from our visit to New Valhalla. The commander of the Imperial garrison, Commander Ivar, informed us that Benjen Stark and the other rangers did stop by the city over the course of the last few months, but after they left, they were never seen or heard from again." Mormont took a deep breath as he processed the news. Though this wasn't the answer he hoped for, it was better than nothing. Uncertainty weighed heavily, but at least they knew Benjen and the others had made it that far. Now, the hard question, what had happened after they left? Mormont rubbed his beard, eyeing the messenger. "Did they move any direction that you could tell from the reports there?" "West, Commander," the messenger replied. "The men at New Valhalla said they took supplies and went further out, past the Milkwater and toward the Frostfangs." The Lord Commander looked over his crew. Alistair Thorne was not with them. He'd stayed at Castle Black, scheming and cursing every day the Lord Commander was gone. "Doubt we'll have an easy time once it gets colder," Mormont said. "We need to push even further. We can't afford to wait." Corran Halfhand nodded his head. "We need to be careful about the supposed Night King that the Imperials have seen," he said, not really wanting to believe that such a thing actually existed. "I have encountered one of those White Walkers myself during one of my trips beyond the wall, but I don't much believe in this Night King until I see him personally." Everybody pretty much had the same opinion on the matter, as it was easier to believe something that you have personally seen rather than something you heard from another person. Commander Mormont sent several scouting parties out to try and find something related to the missing rangers and find the gathering of wildlings. If the wildlings were gathering in mass, then he wanted to know so that he could call for assistance from the other southern kings to help defend the wall. After the meeting, Jon was chosen by Corran to accompany one of the scouting parties. A few days later, Jon crouched behind a ridge of snow-covered stone, eyes on the clearing below them. Corran had sent him and Stone Snake ahead to scout a wildling camp nestled in a grove. Just a small fire and 3 tents, no more than a handful of people. Jon's heart pounded in his chest. This was his first real mission outside Castle Black without the security of numbers. They waited for dusk, then crept down in silence. Jon tackled one of the wildlings to the ground as Ghost charged forward. Swords clashed and arrows flew. Stone Snake slit a man's throat before the second even knew they were under attack. Jon wrestled with the last, a girl. She fought savagely and was younger than he'd expected. Her hair a wild tangle of red. She tried to bite him. Jon slammed her down, pressing the edge of Long Claw against her throat. "I yield," she shouted. "I yield, Crow." Breathing hard, Jon glanced at Stone Snake. "This one's alive." Stone Snake looked unimpressed. "She's a wildling." "She yielded," Jon said. Stone Snake scowled. "Then you kill her quick. We don't take prisoners." Jon hesitated. His grip on the sword didn't loosen. "We might learn something." "Your call," Stone Snake said, already moving to loot the other corpses. Jon pulled the girl to her feet. "What's your name?" She glared at him. "Ygritte, of the Free Folk." He tied her hands and walked her up the slope. She didn't stop talking the entire time. "You lot know nothing, with your wall and your vows. You think you're so high and mighty, but you know nothing." By the time they made camp, Jon was already questioning himself. That night, he stood over her, blade in hand. Stone Snake was asleep. The wind hissed through the rocks. Ygritte stared at him without fear. "Do it," she said. You crows don't spare wildlings. Jon stared down at her, then slowly cut her bindings. Run. She blinked. What? Go, Jon said. Before I change my mind. She backed away, then sprinted into the trees without saying another word. Stone Snake never found out and thought Jon found the courage to kill the woman. However, 2 days later, they were ambushed by a wildling party. Ygritte had told them, of course. Jon didn't blame her. It was what any of them would have done. They were surrounded in the pass. Qhorin fought like a madman, hacking through 2 men before he was forced back. But it was too late. They were captured and bound. They marched for a day before they reached the main wildling host, thousands of them, camped under the shadow of the Frostfangs. Jon saw things he hadn't imagined. Tents built like small wooden houses, wildlings from dozens of clans united under one man, and leading them all, Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall. But it wasn't Mance who came to see Jon first. It was the women that he had let go. Ygritte stood in the firelight that night, arms crossed, lips twisted in between amusement and suspicion. You let me go, she said. Why? I didn't want to kill you, he said plainly. Kindness'll kills you quicker than a sword, she said. You're lucky it was me you spared. Jon didn't answer as he was thinking about a way to escape. That night, Qhorin spoke quietly. They'll test you. They won't trust you unless they believe you've turned. You understand what that means? Jon nodded slowly. They'll want me to kill you. Yes. Qhorin looked at him dead in the eye. And you will. Jon shook his head. There has to be another way. There isn't. That night Jon could barely sleep because of what Qhorin discussed with him. The next morning, they dragged Qhorin into a ring of watching wildlings. They threw a sword at Jon. Kill him, they said. Prove you're not a crow. Qhorin met his eyes as Jon stepped forward with Longclaw raised. Forgive me, he said as he prepared to fight. But, before they could exchange blows with their swords, the fight was interrupted. The Imperials are here, shouted a man as the wildlings all stood up and looked to their right. A large group of around 100 Vikings from New Valhalla arrived as they were on their way to search for the White Walkers. This was not the first time that the two sides had met. In fact, it is a common occurrence for the two sides to meet despite their differences. The leader of the group, a Viking by the name of Rollo, had stepped forward with his brothers following behind him in a long line formation. Mance approached with his own group of wildlings. What can we do for you this time, Rollo? Mance asked as the two had met many times over the course of the last year. We're on our little expedition to make sure that the White Walkers and the Night King haven't killed everybody within this camp. I must say I am quite surprised since you're just sitting ducks out here in the open. Mance didn't respond as it was a little friendly banter between the two. Might as well start calling me brother with all the times you've come to check up on us. Folk will start talking if they realize just how often we come to visit you, Rollo said as he looked around. We're going to continue checking places for any movement. Better warn the other clans that we might be stopping by. Mance had a serious expression as he asked, Have you seen anything yet? The last group you sent down our way said they saw more walkers down south. Rollo thought for a moment before answering. A few small groups, he replied. Nothing organized. But they're not far. Mance nodded. They've killed enough of us already. That's one thing we can't let them do more of. He and Rollo spoke as though they weren't about to take each other's head off at the first chance. If it gets too dangerous, we're going to climb that wall and seek safety in the south, Mance stated. As we talked about before, any attack on the wall is something that I would not recommend. The Emperor hasn't stated his stance on the matter, but if you march against the wall, that will be akin to marching against the north, and you may find yourself facing something scarier than those walkers and the Night King, threatened Rollo. Mance nodded, understanding, but he also had thousands of people to look after. You say this, but my priority is my people first. Plus, by the time your Emperor gets here, we'll have climbed the wall already. Rollo nodded his head in understanding, as what Mance said is what somebody in his position should say. But it was also his fault for not accepting the Emperor's offer of protection several months ago. Fair enough. Just make sure you know what you're doing before you do it. Jon watched in disbelief. Ygritte saw the look on his face. You Southerners know nothing, she laughed. Mance is a man like any other. Jon was still shocked as he thought that these wildlings were savages who enjoyed killing everything in their path. They were nothing like what he heard on his travels. They were just people like the rest of them trying to survive. Looking past Mance at Jon and Qhorin, Rollo's eyes shot up in surprise. What do we have here? Just 2 men in black who attacked and killed a few of our scouts. They were captured a few days ago and brought here," replied Mance. The Imperials were playing both sides and had remained neutral when it came to conflicts between the two sides. However, Rollo knew that it wouldn't take much for them to pick one side or the other. It was all about who they favored and or what was happening. He looked at John's face and recognized who he was. He was one of the people that had gained the interest of the Emperor and was being watched by the Shadowhand agents. So, if he was here, then the Shadowhand were close by and he didn't need to do anything. "Well," he stated, "we won't keep you any longer, Mance," Rollo said as the two sides went about their business. When they were gone, Mance resumed what they were doing before, resulting in John killing Corin, making the wildlings believe that he wanted to join them. Chapter 89. The Wildlings Move South. John spent the next few weeks with the wildlings, or the free folk as he now referred to them. He used his status as a bastard and treatment within the Night's Watch as his reasoning for wanting to join the free folk. This combined with his actions had convinced Mance for the most part, though he still held some doubt. But over time John managed to convince him with his actions. A few weeks earlier, at the Fist of the First Men, the Night's Watch continued to camp out, searching for the wildlings and their lost rangers. They had been camping out for weeks and had not found what they were looking for. Lord Commander Mormont was thinking about retreating back to the wall in response to the morale of the men. They were beyond the wall, in the cold, and far away from Castle Black, making most anxious that they could be attacked at any time. Before he could actually order a retreat, however, their camp was attacked by the White Walkers. A quietness fell over the Fist of the First Men as the wind died. The fire pits hissed and flickered. Horses grew restless, snorting and pawing at the frozen ground. Then the dogs started barking, not one or two, but dozens. Lord Commander Mormont stood just outside his tent, wrapped in his bearskin cloak. The mist from his breath was visible through the cold with the sun rising in the distance. Shortly after, a scout ran up talking about some strange movement within the surrounding area. Lord Commander Mormont didn't want to take any chances on finding out too late whether this movement was real or not. "Sound the horns," he ordered calmly. "All men to arms." Mormont turned to his steward. "Wake every man. Now." Chaos erupted in the camp as men poured out of their tents half-dressed, fumbling with cloaks and sword belts. The ravens screamed in their cages, flapping against the bars. Gren stumbled as he ran, dragging his sword, while Dolorous Ed muttered, "Bloody hells, why'd it have to be today?" From the woods beyond the camp, shapes moved, tall, slow, and eerily graceful. The White Walkers didn't charge. They came like shadows moving through the trees, their presence heralded by an intense cold. Snow began to fall in heavy, unnatural flakes. And then the dead came behind them. Corpses. Dozens. No, hundreds of missing rangers, wildlings, horses, and creatures twisted and pale. Eyes glowing ice blue, mouths locked in screams. They charged forward in silence. Not a single war cry, just the sound of snow crunching beneath their rotting limbs. "Form a shield wall," Mormont shouted, sword drawn. "Archers, light those arrows." The front ranks of the watch braced on the slope. They had the high ground. That was their only advantage as the fire arrows flew into the sky, trailing flame. A few dead men dropped, twitching. Most didn't even flinch as they dropped. Then the cold hit. A wave of it, unnatural and bone-deep, crashing over the Fist like a curse. Torches flickered. Fires died. One of the cook fires turned to frost in an instant, freezing the stew solidly mid-boil. Men started to shake, not from fear, but because their blood no longer felt warm. Corin's second, Ser Otten Withers, rode along the ridge shouting orders, until a spear of ice took him through the neck. His body fell backward, vanishing into the snow. The first wave of whites slammed into the Night's Watch lines. Sam Tarley swung blindly with his dagger, tripping over a corpse that rose behind him. Gren turned just in time, driving his sword through the thing's throat. It didn't die, kept moving. "Burn them," someone yelled. "Only fire kills them." But fire was scarce. The torches failed. Oil froze. Mormont's men fought bravely, but the truth became clear within minutes. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and out of time. A White Walker stepped onto the hill. It walked with inhuman grace, its armor shining like frost-covered glass, its sword long and curved, glowing faintly blue. Every step it took froze the earth beneath it. It didn't speak a single word. A ranger charged it, brave and nameless. The White Walker parried and shattered the steel blade like it was nothing. One swipe and the ranger's head were separated from his body. Back! Mormont bellowed. Pull back to the crest. He could see men dying all around him. Edison Tollett dragging a wounded brother. Bowen Marsh screaming as a corpse bit into his leg. Kapar went down with an axe in his gut. Then came the second wave. More whites poured out of the trees, limbs jerking, mouths slack. One of them wore a black cloak. One of the lost rangers. The battle turned into a rout. Rangers broke ranks, trying to flee up the hill toward the horses. Some slipped. Some didn't get up. But the dead didn't tire. They just kept climbing, dragging, and biting. Mormont fought like a bear, roaring, cleaving, rallying those who could still stand. He lost count of how many he'd killed. His sword arm was numb as he got on his horse and led the retreat back to Castor's Keep. All of this happened a few days after Rollo visited the Free Folk camp. Now the same thing that happened at the Fist of the First Men was about to happen to the Free Folk. The Night King had planned this attack on both the Night's Watch and Free Folk to force the two in conflict so that he could raise more men for his army. He heard about the strange men who built a town on the coasts and were dangerous for whites and White Walkers, so he planned to deal with them personally before his march to the wall. At the Free Folk camp, one of the scouts had reported about the large number of the dead approaching their location. Now more than ever, the Free Folk were anxious, so Mance ordered that they have to flee south and hide behind the wall in order for them to be safe from the Night King and his army. The camp consisted of nearly 110,000 Free Folk, which would take some time to get this massive number of people moving. As 2 days passed, several thousand had decided to flee to the safety of New Valhalla, where they knew they would be safe from the undead and wouldn't have to try and fight the Night's Watch on the wall. There was nothing Mance could do about these desertions, so he just pressed on south. However, some of the clans, such as the Thens, were not happy with this predicament and wanted to force others to fight against the Night's Watch. Many of them started to chase the people, fleeing to force them to fight. This news had already reached Maximus's ears as the Shadowhand were monitoring the movement of the Free Folk. Sitting at his temporary office in Storm's End, he was going over the rewards that he got from taking the Stormlands. It was nothing too great, as he only received 100,000 system points, 20,000 elven spearmen, and 10,000 elven archers. Instead of bringing new troops from across the sea, he decided to use these new summons to reinforce the wall. Walking into his office, Ianwi took a seat across from him. I want you to lead 30,000 troops to the wall and repel the attack from the wildlings, while also subjugating them. You may have to make an example out of a few of them before they submit to you, but make sure that they are subjugated after they get defeated. Ianwi nodded his head, understanding what his mission was. I guess those wildlings have finally decided to move on the wall. I expected it to happen sometime soon. I just wish they took our warnings seriously or joined us as we suggested. But I guess some people just don't think about their future and just linger on the past. Maximus agreed with him on this matter. They had offered the wildlings a good deal which would benefit both parties involved, but them being the wildlings, most of them rejected the deal. Some of them accepted, which is why New Valhalla was established, but majority of the clans remained relatively hostile or neutral. That's why we left them alone for the past 2 years. But now that they are going to jeopardize the integrity of the wall, we will have to finally make our move and subjugate them. Also, I'll send some Wyvern Riders and Dragon Knights to help you man the walls and start making preparations against the Night King. You think the wildlings will cause us much trouble? Asked Ianwi. No, Maximus replied. I know they'll cause you less than you expect. But this deployment will be for next 5 years to see the end of the Night King and the post-war reconstruction. Ianwi nodded as they talked about a few things, mainly how cold it was going to be and how they could counteract that. Ianwi requested some witches to be sent as well as rune-inscribed heaters and equipment to provide better heating for the soldiers. Maximus agreed as the cold would cause morale to go down, but with the addition of witches and rune-inscribed equipment they could counteract this. A day later and Ianwi was en route to the wall on board an airship accompanied by several other airships carrying the other 30,000 soldiers. Accompanying them were 6 Wyvern Riders, 100 Dragon Knights, and 50 witches. The rune equipment would arrive several days later as it had to be created and transported from Heaven's Reach directly. Chapter 90 Battle of Lannisport. At Lannisport, the Northern Army, which was combined with the soldiers from the Riverlords, found themselves stuck between a rock and a hard place. Instead of taking the river road to Lannisport, Tywin led his army of 30,000 to King's Landing, where he basically took 10,000 soldiers and then took the Gold Road up to Lannisport. The Gold Road led right up to the rear of Robb's army of 25,000 which were besieging the city, allowing Tywin to cut them off from behind. Robb's scouts had been caught before they could make it back to the camp, which allowed Tywin's army to sneak behind them. The various commanders had ordered a portion of the army to turn around to face the incoming Lannister knights. The North and Riverland soldiers rushed to their horses while the infantry ran to set up a shield wall to pose some sort of resistance against the mounted Lannister knights. However, hundreds of soldiers rushing at once to their horses wasn't exactly organized. Barely 200 managed to countercharge as the Lannister knights smashed charged right through them and then into the shield wall. The line collapsed under the charge of 6,000 Lannister knights. As the knights battered through, horns sounded, and the main Lannister army advanced on the northern host's rear. The northern army turned into chaos as some fought valiantly while others ran, afraid of being trampled by horses. Robb was at the back of the army, wanted to charge in, but his father halted him and instead took control while his son remained behind. Yet even as the northern rear fought desperately, a horn blast echoed from the walls of Lannisport. With the enemy distracted, the garrison, some 5,000 fresh troops who had been conserving their strength, sallied out of the city gates. They charged out in ranks led by Ser Adam Marbrand, striking into the exposed flanks of the northern front. Panic threatened to spread among the northern infantry, who were now under attack from two sides. Robb's men found themselves being ground between Tywin's vanguard and the sudden garrison attack. But Robb ordered a controlled withdrawal to regroup on a defensible ridge. Lord Karstark led a furious counterassault with his heavy infantry, forming a crescent around the Lannisport garrison troops to slow their advance. Meanwhile, Ser Brynden Tully led a detachment to plug the rear gap, halting the push of Lannister horse with pikemen in tightly disciplined ranks. The battle seesawed for hours. The river lords under Lord Tytos Blackwood proved tenacious, forming a stalwart center to hold the line. Roose Bolton sent his men in flanking waves, striking at overstretched Lannister positions. The northern longbowmen, perched on nearby slopes, rained arrows into Tywin's formations, thinning their ranks. Tywin's forces did the same, and due to their superior number, they managed to cause more damage than the northern longbowmen did. While Robb's army had used some clever tactics to hold for so long, 25,000 men couldn't beat 40,000 men, especially when they were attacked from two sides. After almost an hour and a half, Eddard shouted to his son. "Tell the men to retreat," yelled Eddard, as he saw the battle was not winnable in its current state. Robb found himself forced to make a difficult choice. "Retreat!" he shouted as loud as he could. The commanders had spread the word, and soon enough Robb's army was attempting to flee up the northern road back up to Riverrun. But Tywin wasn't going to let this happen. He already planned for this and had the remainder of his mounted knights hunt down the fleeing soldiers. There were a few attempts on both Robb and Eddard's life as they fled, but the Shadowhand agents appeared to block every attack and keep them alive. Eddard didn't notice it, but he would have been during the battle if not for the Shadowhand agents. Tywin had finally dealt a serious blow to the northern forces and had gained a significant victory. Robb's army had suffered a total of 15,000 casualties, with nearly 9,000 being killed, while the others being severely injured, slightly injured, or captured. As a few days passed and the remainder of Robb's army had made it back to Riverrun, less than 10,000 soldiers remained from the encounter. Some fled during the retreat, others died from injuries along the way. Many lords had died, including Lords Karstark, Mormont, and a few others. This was a devastating loss for the Northern Army and the Northern cause in general. Maximus knew about the Lannister army and its movements, but he didn't inform Robb as this was a necessary evil that needed to happen in order to force the North to seek his help. Still, as he read the report, he didn't expect them to be caught off guard like that. He began to see why Tywin was considered to be calculating, intelligent, politically astute, and ruthless. Now all he needed to do was wait until they came begging for his assistance. Arriving at Castle Black, Ianwe looked down at the massive ice wall that separated the two sides. It was magnificent, sure, but he could also break a portion of it himself. As a mayor, it wouldn't be too difficult for him, but to the average person who only heard stories, it would seem impossible. "Sir," said a soldier as he approached Ianwe. "Where shall we land?" he asked. Ianwe pointed to an area just outside of the castle. "There." The soldier followed his finger and nodded his head as he left to relay the information to the captain who was in charge of flying the airship. Several minutes later, the airship had landed just outside Castle Black, while the other airships had just hovered in place, waiting for orders. Ianwe led a detachment of Dragon Knights to Castle Black to negotiate with the Lord Commander. If all goes well, they can defend the wall alongside the Night's Watch. If all goes to shit, then they would just take it by force. They could do this anyway, but it didn't hurt to ask, right? Meanwhile, within Castle Black, the men were going crazy from the sudden appearance of flying ships. Most didn't know who these ships belonged to, while the younger men who had arrived within the past 2 years knew exactly who these belonged to. Just a few days ago, the brothers from the expedition across the wall had come back with less men than they left with, causing a lot of questions to be asked. By this point, a few things had already happened. The mutiny at Craster's Keep, resulting in the death of Lord Commander Jeor Mormont. The loyal men had returned alongside Samwell Tarly and one of Craster's wives along with her child. Now the de facto commander of Castle Black and the Night's Watch, Ser Alistair Thorne, calls the men to arms in preparation for whatever was about to happen after seeing one of the airships land. Riding up to the wall, Ianwe already saw the Night's Watch with crossbows aimed at him from on top of the gates. He held up his hand, halting his escort while he approached slowly. "My name is Ianwe, a high-ranking member of the Imperial Union, and I am here to speak with Lord Commander Mormont," he stated. Ser Alistair Thorne stepped forward. "The Lord Commander has been killed," he replied. This surprised Ianwe, as he hadn't heard the news, so he figured this must be a recent development. "All right then, let me speak to whoever is in charge then." "That's me," Ser Alistair Thorne replied again. The only reason he hadn't killed this group was because he could clearly tell that they were not wildlings and they did bear the Imperial banner on their chest plates. "Well, how about offering up some hospitality and let's sit down in a warm room to discuss things?" offered Ianwe. Ser Alistair Thorne didn't like that idea, nor did he trust these men, so he shook his head in response. "I think not, Lord Ianwe. You say you are from the Imperial Union, but what is your purpose here specifically?" Ianwe was getting a little bit agitated at the disrespect he was getting despite him being here to save their lives. "Ah, that's simple. I am here to negotiate with the Night's Watch to work together to repel the wildlings' attack," he explained. Ser Alistair was taken by surprise. He hadn't heard anything about this, and he guessed that the man was lying. "Lies! The wildlings are not going to attack the wall. And even if they did, why should we trust you?" Samwell Tarly was watching this unfold and didn't know what to do. He knew a lot about the Imperial Union, and he knew who Ianwe was from studying in the Imperial Union prior to his banishment to the wall. If such an important person came here, then he believed him without question. Though his brothers didn't. He was about to open his mouth when everything seemed to slow down. Then in the next second, the gate was practically blown open and everybody standing on top of the walls was blown away. Ianwe charged in with the Dragon Knights following behind him. He found Ser Alistair amongst the debris and grabbed him by his neck. The surrounding brothers were about to come to his assistance, but they saw the Dragon Knights storm the area. That's when, from above, one of the dragon riders landed on one of the buildings overlooking the entrance of the castle. This caused everybody to freeze in place. "It's a fucking dragon," one person shouted. Ianwe didn't choke Ser Alistair out and just dropped him on the ground as he addressed the others. "Now, everybody put their weapons down and nobody will die." With morale already low, everybody dropped their weapons in a heartbeat. "Good, now from now on, the wall is under my control. You men will assist in manning the wall in preparation for the wildlings' invasion. In return you will receive better gear and some warmth. In the meantime, everybody line up in the courtyard," he ordered. He began counting how many people were actually in the castle and then began making preparations. With Castle Black under his control, he began to expand to other castles set up defenses. The 30,000 elven army moved quickly, spread out, and began to set up patrols to cover the entire wall. Ianwe didn't want to do it this way, but Ser Alistair forced his hand with his attitude.